is still developing, and it could take several different possible courses, but it's very grave. And unfortunately, I think this is just the beginning. A lot hinges on the willingness of Iran to make it through the next 2 to 4 weeks. That's the timetable that President Trump indicated is his preference. And he would prefer this to finish like Venezuela, decapitation of the leadership, replacement with a more quiet administration, and some kind of uh, vassal or subordinate relationship with the United States. That looks less and less likely. The damage that Iran has suffered, the culture of resistance inside the Islamic Republic, makes it likely that they will persist through the subsequent US attacks. And the most dangerous element is that the United States can only sustain its anti missile defenses for about 2 to 4 weeks. After that, they begin to run out. If there are more Iranian missiles than there are anti missile systems available to the Americans, then after a month of sustained damage to Iran, it becomes easier and easier for the Islamic Republic to retaliate against targets throughout the region. I think that the objectives of Israel are maximalist in this respect. The relationship between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump is quite extraordinary, quite unprecedented in terms of the long-standing Israel-United States alliance. Previously, there have been presidents willing to draw red lines, willing to say no to Israeli demands for escalation. But apparently, in this situation, it's really the Israeli strategic logic to destroy any nodes of resistance, any ability for organized state adversaries to build up their strength and to remain in a position to challenge Israeli hegemony. That seems to be the driving concern. I wouldn't also overlook the domestic American considerations of the Trump administration. Recently, the popularity of Donald Trump has reached extremely low levels. There have been scandals associated with the treatment of immigrants in ICE detention and strong armed tactics that have resulted in the deaths of U.S. citizens. There's also the ongoing scandal associated with the Epstein files, which strongly implicates Donald Trump. Now, this move allows Donald Trump to try to claim the mantle of war leadership and potentially invoke some of the emergency powers, or at the very least, the psychological manipulation, the psychological dominance that can come with invoking patriotic duty, the memory of fallen soldiers, these kinds of things. And it becomes much easier for him to use coercion against political enemies, which is a consideration with the upcoming midterm elections. I believe that there's something unprecedented about this Trump administration. It is markedly different even than his first administration, when there were more experienced, more senior people willing to push back against Donald Trump's style of personal leadership. I believe that he has taken his success with the Venezuela raid as indication of how these things naturally develop. And he was further emboldened by the lack of a strong Iranian response to the first wave of attacks against their nuclear sites. He and his team probably figured that 4 weeks of sustained bombing, decapitation strikes against Iranian leadership would be enough to force submission in this US-led order that Donald Trump has proposed for not just the region, but the world overall through his support of peace and other initiatives. And I think that it's becoming clearer and clearer to American leadership that the Iranian Republic, the Islamic Republic, is able to retaliate, is able to sustain losses much greater than those in Venezuela, much greater than those of other adversaries the United States is used to. And that this situation has left them at a bit of a strategic impasse. They don't have any pre-positioned ground troops that can enter to fully eliminate the regime. Indeed, there's this naive hope that there will be a spontaneous uprising of the Iranian people that somehow compel the IRGC and other elements of the security apparatus to simply surrender and step aside for maybe the return of the Shah or some other pliable figure. But right now, according to American press, the sentiment in the Pentagon is one of intense paranoia. And I think that that will continue as the reality of American losses, losses to international trade, losses to allies begin to mount. Absolutely. I think that the United States, when it is facing a conventional military where there are targets that can be destroyed, uniformed personnel kill. That is the mission that they train for. That is what the technology is designed for, and at that they excel. But the human element, the understanding of administration, the understanding of foreign cultures, cadres that can interface with local populations, those are all missing. Those agencies have been systematically sidelined because they tend to produce more pessimistic analysis than executive decision makers would like. And I think that one of the lessons the United States should have learned from Iraq is that it needs to know how to lose well. If they had simply made way for a figure like Muqtada al-Sadr after the first 2 or 3 years of occupation, announced that he was their enemy, they'd given him the opportunity to consolidate power, then Iraq probably would have been a much more stable country at the end of that. And you could have normalized relations and ended up with a situation like the United States has with Vietnam. Instead, they stubbornly insisted on having a regime to their liking. And as a result, the situation dragged on, ISIS emerged, and you had geopolitical chaos as a result. No, what I expect is that the costs will mount and escalate beyond what the United States is willing to tolerate. The um, and what you'll see, I believe, after 3 or 4 weeks after the reality begins to sink in within the Trump administration, is that the definition of success will be reduced, whittled and whittled down from those six strategic objectives down to one or two, and fundamentally they'll simply say something along the lines of, "Well, we got Khamenei, that's enough. The country's in ruins. We can just go home. That's it." And the question is, what will emerge from Iran at that point? Will it be a revived, re-legitimized Islamic Republic? Will there be some kind of successor regime? Will there be fragmentation as different elements of Iranian society, whether it's ethnic minorities or different ideological groups, start to stake their claim to the country's future? That is very uncertain. I think that um, it's difficult to know until the question of succession. And we've seen some initial moves. There's been a leadership council announced and a new interim leader among a council of three. But so far, the message has been one of defiance and one of resistance. The network of proxies and allies that Iran has cultivated in the region, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Iranian militia, Iraqi militia, has not entered fully into the conflict yet. And the Houthis have demonstrated in the past that they can just shut down the Red Sea trade routes, shut down the Suez Canal. So I think that there will be a much more severe test of the ability of Israel and the United States to impose their will on Iran. And more likely than not, as we've seen in places as varied as Haiti or Somalia or Vietnam, once the losses begin to mount and once domestic conditions deteriorate in the United States, there's a very strong temptation for for American leaders to realize that this is an away game. They can just go home. There's an ocean between them and the battlefield. And then they take that opportunity to leave. I would be very anxious if I were in any of the Gulf states, places like Dubai, Qatar, Bahrain, where there's a significant overseas population or local Shia that might be sympathetic to Iran and might have legitimate grievances against the government. Um, a lot of these countries are heavily dependent on foreign expats that have been lured there by the promise of peace, stability, and normalcy. And right now they're seeing that that promise can't be kept. Similarly, I expect that there will be a return to more waves of terrorism against civilian targets in the West. It'll be interesting to see what extent Iran will try to separate America's European allies and other NATO powers from the US by distinguishing American or Israeli targets from Western targets in general. That might be a sound strategy given the amount of transatlantic tension that is currently building and the question mark that's hanging over NATO. I think that the front is going to move into every position where Iranian agents or sympathizers can be activated.